The federal courtroom in Akron was silent when the clerk began reading the names. 64 families. Some had lost apartments. Some had lost cars they needed for work. Others had gone without medicine, heat, or enough food, while a strike fund they had paid into for years sat empty. By the time the truth came out, Kessler Steelworks was closing, the union was broken, and neighbors who once stood together were accusing one another of betrayal. At the center sat Raymond Cole, 47, former treasurer of Asheville Steelworkers, Local 418. Prosecutors said he had not merely taken money. He had turned survival into leverage. Families who supported him were helped first. People who questioned him were delayed. Innocent immigrant workers were blamed for losses Raymond knew they had not caused. And when his oldest friend gave him one last chance to tell the truth, Raymond used that mercy to protect himself. To Asheville, he was worse than a thief. He was the man who understood exactly what that money meant. But 34 years earlier, Raymond had stood beside his father in a church basement, holding a bag of donated groceries. Henry Cole had spent more than 3 decades inside a steel mill. Then the company failed, the pension disappeared, and the men who had promised to protect the workers stopped returning his calls. Raymond watched his father lower his eyes as former co-workers passed the table. That afternoon, the boy made himself a promise. He would never let working families be humiliated like that again. For years, it seemed he had kept it. Raymond learned accounting. He helped workers avoid eviction. He delivered emergency checks after accidents and funerals. People trusted him with money they could not afford to lose. Then one private debt became one hidden transfer. One hidden transfer became a system. And the boy who hated seeing his father betrayed grew into the man who decided which families deserved to survive. His childhood explains why money came to mean dignity, safety, and power. It does not erase what he chose to do with that power. So where did Raymond Cole cross the line from a frightened son trying to protect his family into the man who destroyed 64 others? To answer that, the story must return to Asheville, long before the strike, the missing money, and the moment everyone learned what Raymond had become. By the time Judge Evelyn Marsh looked down at Raymond Cole, everyone in the courtroom already knew the number. 64 families. Inside that room, it no longer sounded like a statistic. It sounded like rent notices folded into pockets, cars taken from driveways before sunrise, and prescription bottles left half empty because a worker had chosen groceries instead. Raymond sat at the defense table with his hands clasped tightly. Behind him were people who had once trusted him with money they could not afford to lose. Miguel Santos sat in the second row. For most of their lives, Miguel had been the person Raymond called before anyone else. He had defended Raymond in union meetings, brought food to the Cole house when they were boys, and later given him 7 days to tell the truth before the damage became permanent. Raymond had used those 7 days to make Miguel look guilty. Laura sat several seats away, on the side reserved for victims and their families. She did not look at her husband. The house they had once celebrated had already been sold under court order. Its walls and hardwood floors had become line items in a restitution report. The prosecutor told the court that Raymond understood what every delayed check meant. He knew which family was behind on rent, whose child needed medication, and who had already begun selling tools or furniture. That knowledge had once made him valuable. Later, it made him dangerous. Judge Marsh did not call Raymond a monster. She said something that hurt him more. "You became the kind of man you spent your life claiming to hate." Raymond lowered his head. He had heard thief, fraud, and traitor throughout the trial. But traitor reached deepest. It carried him back to Asheville in 1992, to a chain-link fence outside a steel mill, and the day his father learned that 32 years of loyalty could disappear inside a closed meeting room. Asheville had been built around the mill. The morning whistle rolled over rows of narrow houses before sunrise. Stores opened when workers came off nights. Children learned that the dark dust on their father's boots paid for heating oil, school clothes, and Christmas. Henry Cole believed in that bargain. He was 49 when the old Asheville mill collapsed under debt. For weeks, supervisors told workers not to panic. Union representatives promised that pensions were protected. Then the gates closed. Raymond was 13 when he stood beside his father outside the plant. Henry still carried his metal lunchbox, though there would be no shift that day. Men waited near the locked entrance, hoping someone would explain why their badges no longer worked. A union official finally appeared with a stack of notices. The pension fund had been restructured. Some benefits would be delayed. Others would be reduced. For men Henry's age, the future they had spent decades earning was no longer guaranteed. Henry read the notice twice. Then he looked toward the office windows above the gate. The people who had signed the agreement were already gone. Raymond watched men who once slapped his father on the shoulder avoid his eyes. Henry folded the notice into smaller and smaller squares until the paper nearly disappeared inside his fist. Nothing violent happened. No one shouted. That was what Raymond remembered most. A life could be taken apart quietly. It could happen beneath fluorescent lights, with official signatures and language polite enough to hide what was being done. On the walk home, Henry said the company had stolen from them. Raymond asked whether the union would fix it. Henry did not answer. That silence became the first lesson Raymond carried forward. Hard work did not protect a man, loyalty did not protect a family, and truth meant little if someone else controlled the books. Within months, unpaid bills began changing the Cole household. But before Raymond understood how far his father would fall, he made one private decision of his own. When Miguel asked why Henry was home during the day, Raymond smiled and said his father had taken time off. It was a small lie. It harmed no one that afternoon. But it was the first time Raymond chose a cleaner story over a humiliating truth. Years later, he would make the same choice in larger rooms, with larger sums, and with other families paying the price. The first winter after the mill closed, the Cole house did not fall apart all at once. It changed in smaller ways. The furnace stayed lower. Ruth cut coupons from newspapers left at the laundromat where she worked. Henry stopped replacing the worn insoles in his boots. Bills moved from the kitchen counter into a flour tin above the stove, as if hiding them could make the amounts smaller. Raymond noticed everything. His mother counted change before leaving for work. His father still woke before dawn, dressed in his work shirt, poured coffee, and sat at the table until the sun rose over Ashevale. Then Henry took the shirt off. At first, he searched for work with the discipline of a man reporting for a shift. He visited machine shops, warehouses, and maintenance yards. Most never called. The few that did wanted younger men whose bodies had not been worn down by the labor they were now being denied. Ruth added evening shifts at an industrial laundry near the interstate. She came home smelling of detergent and hot metal, placed her pay envelope on the table, and divided it into rent, electricity, food, and whatever could wait. Raymond began to understand that poverty was not only the absence of money, it was the daily decision about which problem was allowed to become worse. For Raymond, the most frightening part was not hunger. It was watching need rearrange the authority inside the house. Ruth earned the money. Volunteers supplied the food. Employers decided whether Henry still had value. His father remained the same man, yet every outside decision made him appear smaller. Miguel Santos still came by after school. When Mrs. Santos sent over beans and rice, Miguel said she had cooked too much. Raymond knew it was kindness. He hated how much it felt like proof. At school, he told classmates that Henry was taking time off while the company reorganized. He said the pension issue would be corrected. Each lie protected his father from pity and Raymond from the possibility that the truth might become permanent. By January, the Cole family began collecting groceries from the basement of St. Agnes Church. Ruth chose a pickup time near closing. But Ashevale was small, and need had spread faster than privacy could protect anyone. Former steelworkers stood in a line beside folding tables stacked with canned vegetables, powdered milk, and bread. Henry waited with his metal lunchbox in one hand, carrying a piece of the old life into the new one. A former shift supervisor named Curtis Bell handed out bags. Years earlier, Curtis had asked Henry to train new hires because no one understood the furnace line better. That evening, he placed 2 cans of soup in Henry's bag and said nothing about the mill. Henry thanked him without lifting his eyes. Raymond watched his father's shoulders draw inward. The humiliation was not in receiving food. It was in Henry's belief that the line had erased everything he had once been. Raymond did not yet understand that accepting help could be an act of courage. He saw only a respected man trying to become smaller. On the walk home, Henry said they would not return. Ruth answered, "Pride cannot be cooked for dinner." Henry threw the grocery bag onto the table. A can rolled to the floor. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to stop acting like we are the ones who should be ashamed." But shame had already settled inside him. Henry drank more, stopped calling men from the plant, and began treating every offer of help as an insult. Raymond stayed late at school, where Carol Bennett noticed him. Mrs. Bennett taught accounting and business mathematics. She saw that Raymond did not merely solve problems. He checked them twice and organized disorder into columns that could be understood. She showed him how a ledger revealed where a business had begun to fail. Raymond liked the certainty of it. Numbers did not lower their voices. If something was missing, the page eventually showed the absence. Mrs. Bennett told him about a community college scholarship. Raymond heard opportunity, but he also heard obligation. In his mind, help always created a balance that would someday be collected. He took the application home without telling his parents. Around that time, Henry found temporary work unloading deliveries at a wholesale food warehouse. The pay was low, but he began wearing his work shirt at dawn again. Then a supervisor found several packages of food in Henry's lunchbox. Henry said damaged packages were usually discarded and that someone had allowed workers to take them home. The floor manager denied it. When the warehouse asked Raymond whether his father had brought similar packages home before, Raymond said no. He claimed Henry had mentioned permission days earlier. He spoke with enough confidence to create doubt about the warehouse's own procedures. The company dismissed Henry, but did not contact the police. That evening, Henry sat at the kitchen table with the lunchbox closed before him. "I took what they were throwing away," he said. Raymond wanted to believe the difference mattered. Henry said the warehouse wasted more food in one night than their family could eat in a month. "They owe us more than that." The words settled deeply inside Raymond. They offered a way to turn taking into correction and shame into a claim of justice. Weeks later, Henry found the scholarship application in Raymond's room. He accused his son of planning to leave Ruth alone with the bills. Raymond could have admitted that he was afraid of becoming trapped and that leaving Asheville did not mean abandoning them. Instead, he reached for the secret he knew would end the argument. "At least I'm not stealing food and making Mom lie for me." Henry went still. Raymond regretted the sentence immediately. He saw shame return to his father's face, sharper because it had come from inside the family. But regret did not make him take it back. Henry left the room and never again asked about the scholarship. The lie at the warehouse had begun as protection. Now, the same secret had become a weapon. Raymond learned that knowing what another person feared could end an argument faster than being right. A hidden truth could be stored and used when control began to slip away. Mrs. Bennett helped him complete the application. Miguel promised he would help Ruth while Raymond attended classes. 2 doors opened. One led toward a life built on skill and the willingness to accept help. The other led toward a life in which every favor became a debt, every secret became leverage, and every weakness had to be hidden before someone else could use it. Raymond walked through both. By the spring of Raymond's senior year, the Cole family had learned how to live around bad news. Ruth opened bills after Henry went to bed. Henry searched the classifieds before anyone else woke. Raymond stayed at school until the halls were nearly empty, telling himself he was studying when he was really postponing the walk home. The house had become a place where everyone tried to protect everyone else by withholding something. Ruth hid the electric balance. Henry hid bottles behind the water heater. Raymond hid the scholarship forms Mrs. Bennett had helped him complete. Silence no longer felt dishonest. It felt like maintenance. Raymond earned small amounts keeping books for a tire shop and a family-owned grocery. The work gave him something the house could not. Every receipt had a place. Every shortage had a cause. Even when the answer was unpleasant, the numbers did not pretend nothing was wrong. One afternoon, Raymond found a certified envelope pushed through the mail slot. The landlord had given the family 10 days to pay what they owed or leave. Ruth would not be home until after midnight. Henry was asleep in the back room after drinking through the morning. Raymond stood in the kitchen holding the paper and imagined his mother's face when she saw it. Then he imagined walking into the landlord's office with enough money to stop the eviction. He pictured Ruth looking at him not as a boy who needed saving, but as the person who had saved them. He folded the notice and placed it inside his accounting textbook. For 4 days, Raymond tried to solve the problem alone. He asked the tire shop owner for more hours. He considered taking money from the grocery deposit and returning it after payday, but fear stopped him. He called a charity from a payphone and hung up when the woman asked for his parents' names. He approached a former mill supervisor about work for Henry, then lied and said his father had been sober for months. None of it produced enough money. Each day, Raymond waited made the notice more dangerous. Yet telling Ruth now would mean admitting that he had already stolen time from her. On the 5th night, she found the envelope when the accounting book slipped from Raymond's bag. Ruth did not shout. She read the notice while Raymond explained that he had been trying to fix it. "You had no right," she said. "I was trying to keep us here. You kept us from knowing. There was nothing you could have done. That was not your decision to make." Raymond heard the sentence as proof that she still saw him as powerless. He did not yet understand that sharing the truth meant allowing other people to remain participants in their own lives. Ruth contacted a county housing program the next morning. A caseworker told her the family might have qualified for emergency assistance if the application had been filed before the final notice period. 4 days had mattered. Raymond apologized, but the apology arrived inside an argument. He said the landlord had already decided to remove them. He said the county might have rejected the application anyway. He said he had only wanted to spare her another humiliation. Ruth answered quietly, "You keep calling it protection when what you mean is that you could not bear for us to see you fail." The family had 6 days to leave. Miguel and his father arrived with an old pickup truck. Mrs. Santos brought boxes from the restaurant where she worked. Carol Bennett helped Raymond arrange storage for his school papers and promised the scholarship would remain available even if his address changed. No one mocked the Cole family. That almost made it worse for Raymond. Kindness left him with no enemy to blame. Henry wrapped dishes in newspaper and placed his tools in a wooden crate. Ruth chose what could fit in the small apartment they had found above a hardware store. Everything else went onto the curb or into Miguel's truck. Raymond carried his father's metal lunchbox outside and set it beside a broken lamp. For years, it had meant work. It had crossed the mill gates before Raymond was born. Now it sat among objects strangers could take for free. A neighbor slowed her car and looked toward the pile. Raymond turned the lunchbox so the name Henry Cole faced the house. Miguel noticed and lifted it into the truck. "We can keep this," he said. Raymond heard pity where there was only care. "I didn't ask you to save our garbage." Miguel stopped. "It isn't garbage. Then take it. Your family likes collecting things from people who can't keep them." Miguel set the lunchbox down gently and returned to carrying boxes. Raymond wanted to apologize, but doing so would require admitting that Miguel had seen through him. So he stayed angry until the moment passed. That evening, the Cole family left the only house Raymond remembered. The new apartment had low ceilings and windows facing a brick wall. Ruth called it temporary. Henry called it a room above a store. Raymond did not call it anything. He began spending more time at the community college library. He studied accounting, business law, and financial controls. Professors described him as disciplined and unusually serious. They did not know he was measuring every lesson against the image of his family's belongings on the curb. Raymond did not dream of luxury. He wanted a deed with his name on it, a front door no landlord could lock, and a place no one could order his family to leave. That desire could have remained ordinary, but he tied it to something more dangerous. He began to believe losing a home was not merely hardship. It was exposure. It showed the world that a person had failed to protect those who depended on him. Ruth never accepted that belief. She continued working nights and encouraged Raymond to stay in school. When he tried to give her part of his earnings, she took only enough for groceries. "You do not owe us your future," she said. Raymond heard another debt being created. 2 years later, Ruth became ill. At first, she called it exhaustion. By the time she agreed to see a doctor, the treatment was harder and the choices were fewer. Raymond organized medication schedules, insurance forms, and hospital bills, searching every document for the line that would restore control. There was no such line. Ruth died before Raymond completed his degree. At the funeral, Henry stood beside the casket, looking older than his years. Miguel remained near Raymond without asking him to speak. Mrs. Bennett arranged a short leave from the scholarship program. Again, people offered help without demanding repayment. Again, Raymond could not trust it. He returned to class after 1 week. Part of him believed that stopping would dishonor Ruth. Another part feared grief, like poverty, would become visible if he allowed anyone to witness it. He finished the semester with the highest marks in his program. From the outside, Raymond appeared to be escaping Asheville. Inside, he carried 2 lessons from the house the family had lost. The first was true. Security could disappear faster than decent people expected. The second was not. If he ever lost a home again, it would prove he had become as powerless as his father had been made to feel. Years later, when Raymond faced a choice between surrendering a house and taking money that belonged to other families, he would not experience it as a financial decision. He would experience it as a verdict on whether he had escaped that curb at all. After Ruth's funeral, Raymond returned to the community college before anyone expected him to. His professors called it discipline. Miguel called it survival. Raymond did not argue with either description. Classes gave him hours in which grief could be reduced to tasks. A balance sheet either reconciled or it did not. A column did not ask whether he had said enough to his mother before she died. It simply waited for the missing number. He studied accounting, payroll law, and internal controls. He learned why organizations divided financial authority among several people. One person approved a payment. Another recorded it. Someone else reviewed the account. The system was designed around an uncomfortable truth. Good intentions were not a safeguard. Raymond understood the principle in class. He would later decide it should not apply to him. During his final year, he met Laura Bennett at a county tax assistance program. She was studying nursing and helping older residents complete medical forms. Laura did not know the history of the Cole family. She saw a quiet young man who stayed after closing to make sure every receipt was returned to the right envelope. Raymond liked being known without being pitied. He told her that his mother had died and that his father had worked in steel. He did not mention the pension, the church basement, or the eviction. Those memories felt less like facts than evidence against the person he was trying to become. Laura never demanded them. She believed privacy could be respected without turning it into secrecy. Raymond did not yet understand the difference. After graduation, he was offered an entry-level position with an accounting office in Columbus. The salary was steady and offered distance from Asheville. Then Miguel called. A newer mill, Kessler Steelworkers, was expanding outside Asheville. The workers were organizing a local union, and Miguel had been elected to a temporary leadership committee. They needed someone who understood payroll deductions, benefit funds, and the financial language company lawyers used during negotiations. You always said people like our fathers lost because nobody in the room understood the books, Miguel told him. Now you understand them. Raymond returned to Asheville believing he was returning for the right reason. At first, he was. The records for the new union were disorganized. Receipts sat in cardboard boxes. Dues had been recorded under different employee numbers. Emergency payments were approved through handwritten notes that sometimes disappeared before anyone entered them into a ledger. Raymond worked nights to rebuild the system. He found duplicate charges, corrected missed deposits, and created a reserve for workers injured during temporary shutdowns. When a widowed employee nearly lost her electricity because an assistance request had been misplaced, Raymond traced the paperwork and had the payment approved before the utility deadline. People began learning his name. Older steelworkers who had known Henry stopped Raymond in grocery aisles to thank him. Men who had once seen the Cole family leave their rented house now brought him envelopes containing the dues of entire crews. Each envelope carried more than money. It carried trust. For a time, Raymond treated that trust with care. He married Laura in a small ceremony and rented a modest duplex near the eastern edge of town. Their son, Evan, was born 2 years later. Raymond did not drink. He came home after meetings, checked the locks, and sat beside the crib listening to his child breathe. He was not repeating Henry's life. That fact mattered to him more than he admitted. Miguel eventually became president of Asheville Steelworkers, Local 418. Raymond was elected treasurer without opposition. The two men balanced each other. Miguel could stand before an angry room and make people feel heard. Raymond could take the promises made in that room and show what they would cost. But the clearer Raymond made the books, the more the union depended on him to explain them. Questions that once went to the whole committee began coming directly to his desk. When a worker needed emergency help, someone said, "Ask Ray." When a deposit appeared late, they waited for Raymond's explanation rather than examining the account themselves. He liked the efficiency. He also liked being necessary. Miguel proposed a rule requiring 2 officers to authorize every large transaction. It was a routine protection for shared money. Raymond objected. He said injured workers could not wait for a second signature while someone was on vacation. He reminded the board of the widow whose electricity had nearly been disconnected. He spoke about bureaucracy as if every safeguard were another locked gate between working people and survival. His argument worked because it contained truth. Delays could hurt people. But Raymond left out the other truth. A system built around one trusted person remained safe only as long as that person never became frightened, desperate, proud, or dishonest. The board approved a compromise. Raymond retained broad access, while reviews would occur every few months. Miguel accepted the decision but told him afterward, "The rules aren't there because I think you're a bad man." Raymond heard only the possibility that Miguel had considered it. At home, Laura noticed that he carried union files into the kitchen and answered calls during dinner. She told him the organization needed to function without treating him as its emergency switch. "They trust me," Raymond said. "That is not the same as needing you every hour." To Laura, dependence was a weakness in the system. To Raymond, it was proof that he had value. Henry saw the danger before anyone else. By then, he was older, usually sober, and taking occasional maintenance jobs. During a visit to the union office, he watched 3 workers wait outside Raymond's door for decisions no one else seemed authorized to make. Henry picked up a printed financial report and turned its pages slowly. "The men who lost my pension used to say the accounts were too complicated for anyone else to understand." Raymond took the report from him. "I'm not those men." "No," Henry said. "But they probably said that too." The warning angered Raymond because it came from the person whose life he believed he had spent correcting. Henry saw concentration of power. Raymond saw competence. Miguel saw a friend who had earned trust. Laura saw a man confusing usefulness with love. None of them saw a criminal, because Raymond had not yet taken anything. His first fall was quieter than theft. It was the decision that his history, his work, and his good intentions made oversight unnecessary. He began to believe that questioning his control was the same as questioning his character. That belief did not empty the strike fund, but it removed the hands that might have stopped him when fear finally did. For several years, Raymond Cole became the man Ashevale called when a family was one missed payment away from losing everything. The union's emergency fund was not large, but Raymond knew how to stretch it. He negotiated late fees, arranged partial payments, and called landlords before they could begin eviction proceedings. He remembered which pharmacy would wait 3 days for a check and which utility company required proof before restoring heat. Workers began saying that Raymond could find money where no money existed. That was not true. What he could find was time. For families living from one paycheck to the next, time often felt like rescue. Nora Keene understood that better than most. She was 26, newly divorced, and raising a 6-year-old daughter while working rotating shifts at Kessler Steel. When a payroll error left her short on rent, the union office told her the next review meeting was 5 days away. Raymond stayed after closing. He verified the error, called the landlord, and arranged an emergency payment before midnight. Nora returned the following week with a handwritten thank you note and a pie she could not afford to give away. Raymond told her the money belonged to the workers. Still, he kept the note in his desk. There were other families: a furnace operator recovering from surgery, a widow waiting for a life insurance dispute to be resolved, a young couple whose car had failed during a temporary shutdown. Raymond learned their children's names and the dates their bills came due. He was not pretending to care. He cared deeply. That was what made the change difficult to see. Each successful rescue repaired something inside him. When workers shook his hand, he no longer felt like the boy watching Henry accept groceries in a church basement. He felt like the person standing between a family and that humiliation. But gratitude began to matter too much. Raymond remembered who thanked him publicly at union meetings. He noticed who questioned administrative costs after receiving assistance. He told himself he was only observing character, but slowly he began using those judgments when deciding which file to open first. A worker named Dennis Hall repeatedly asked why the treasurer had so much authority over emergency payments. When Dennis later requested help with a medical bill, Raymond left the application beneath a stack of newer cases for 2 days. The delay did not destroy Dennis's life. The bill was eventually paid. That made it easier for Raymond to excuse what he had done. He had not denied the request. He had simply allowed a difficult man to wait. The reasoning felt small enough to be harmless. Cooperation kept the union efficient, while suspicion consumed time that could be spent helping people. Yet the message spread quietly. Workers began telling one another not to anger Raymond before submitting an application. Laura noticed the change before Miguel did. At home, Raymond described applicants as grateful, difficult, honest, or always looking for trouble. Laura asked why those qualities mattered if written rules determined eligibility. "You don't hear the way some of them talk to me," Raymond said. "They are scared." So was Nora. She didn't treat me like an enemy. Laura put down the dish she was drying. Help is not a loan of loyalty. Raymond knew she was right in principle. But principle did not sit across from desperate families or carry union files home after Evan was asleep. He told himself Laura saw only the checks, not the burden of choosing who received them first. Miguel proposed hiring an independent accountant for an annual review. The expense was modest, and the measure would protect both the union and Raymond. Raymond opposed it at the board meeting. He argued that the union had never lost a dollar under his management. He listed the families helped, the fees avoided, and the errors he had caught. He said spending members' dues to confirm work already done correctly was wasteful. No one wanted to imply that Raymond could not be trusted. The proposal failed. Afterward, Miguel asked why he had fought so hard against a review that would prove the books were clean. "Because I'm tired of being asked to prove what I've already given this place," Raymond said. Miguel reminded him that oversight was not an accusation. Raymond understood the words, but trust had become part of his identity. A review no longer felt like a procedure. It felt like the community reserving the right to withdraw its respect. At the same time, Raymond and Laura were preparing to buy a house on Hawthorne Street. It was not large, the roof needed work, and the backyard sloped toward an abandoned rail line. Laura liked the kitchen windows. Evan wanted the upstairs room facing the maple tree. Raymond cared most about the deed. He read every page twice. His name appeared beside Laura's, printed in language no landlord could revise with 10 days' notice. Henry visited during the inspection. He walked through the empty rooms and said it was a good house. Raymond waited for more. Henry added, "Don't make a building carry more than it can." Raymond assumed his father meant the mortgage. Henry meant memory. The down payment depended partly on profits from a small medical supply business Laura had started with a former nursing colleague. The business looked stable until a distributor dispute, unpaid invoices, and a contract cancellation arrived within the same month. Laura showed Raymond the accounts before the losses became irreversible. "We can walk away from the house," she said. "We lose the inspection money, not our lives." Raymond stared at the figures. Laura was embarrassed, but she was not hiding anything. She gave him the truth early enough for them to choose together. That should have separated their marriage from the silence of the Cole household. Instead, Raymond experienced her honesty as a threat. He had already told coworkers they were buying the house. Miguel had helped Evan build a model of the bedroom. Henry had stood in the kitchen and seen proof that his son had escaped. Giving it up felt larger than losing a deposit. It felt like returning every piece of furniture to the curb. Raymond told Laura he would find another solution. She asked him what solution. He said he needed a few days. At the union office, the emergency fund sat above its required reserve. No strike had been announced. The next major review was months away. Raymond did not take any money that night, but he stayed alone after the building emptied and opened the account. For the first time, he looked at the fund not only as protection for the workers, he looked at it as money under his control that could keep his own family from becoming one of them. Laura expected Raymond to come home with bad news. Instead, he came home with certainty. He told her the house on Hawthorne Street was still possible. He said he had found a temporary solution and that the shortfall would be covered before closing. Laura asked where the money would come from. Raymond said a professional contact had agreed to help. It was the first lie he told her about the house. The truth was that no one had offered anything. Raymond had spent the afternoon calling lenders, reviewing their savings, and calculating what they could sell. Every legal option required the same sacrifice. They had to let the house go. Laura had already accepted that. Raymond had not. That evening, he drove to Hawthorne Street alone. The rooms were empty, and every footstep sounded larger than it should have. He stood in the kitchen where Henry had warned him not to make a building carry too much. Through the window, he could see the maple tree Evan had claimed as his own. Raymond tried to imagine telling his son that the room upstairs would belong to another family. The thought should have been disappointing. Instead, it felt like exposure. He saw the old curb in Asheville, the furniture his family could not keep, and Henry's lunchbox among objects strangers were free to take. Raymond used the memory as evidence that losing the house would mean more than an ordinary setback. It would mean he had never escaped. The next morning, Raymond arrived at the union office before anyone else. The emergency fund held more than its required reserve. No strike had been declared, the mill was operating, and recent claims had been lower than expected. Raymond had spent years explaining that the money belonged to the members who contributed it, He understood that principle better than anyone in the building. He also knew exactly which line he was preparing to cross. For nearly an hour, he did nothing. He reviewed the household debt and calculated how quickly he might replace the missing amount. He included income not yet earned and reimbursements not yet approved. Every version ended with the same comforting conclusion. The money could be returned before anyone needed it. Raymond did not tell himself the transfer was legal. He told himself it was temporary. That distinction allowed him to continue. He moved a portion of the fund without proper approval and recorded it under a description that concealed its true purpose. There was no dramatic moment afterward. No alarm sounded. The account balance changed, and the building remained quiet. Raymond stared at the new number. He felt shame first. Then relief arrived. The relief frightened him because it was stronger. Later that day, Nora Keene stopped by to ask whether a co-worker recovering from surgery might qualify for support. Raymond explained the requirements and promised to review the case. Nora smiled. "That's why people trust you." Raymond looked toward the drawer where he kept her old thank you note. He could have told her then. The transaction could still have been reported and corrected. He might have lost his position, but the fund could have been restored before a family was denied help. Instead, he thanked her. That was the first moment the crime became more than a desperate decision in an empty office. Raymond stood before someone who trusted him, understood that her trust now rested on a falsehood, and chose to preserve it. At home, Laura remained uneasy. She asked to see the loan paperwork from the person Raymond claimed was helping them. He said the agreement was informal and that he would have documents after closing. Laura reminded him that her business had failed partly because she trusted agreements that were not written down. "We can still walk away," she said. Raymond accused her of giving up too easily. The unfairness was obvious even as he spoke. Laura had admitted her mistake and offered to surrender the house before her loss harmed anyone else. She had done what Raymond was refusing to do. He apologized for his tone, but not for the lie beneath it. The house closed several weeks later. Laura stood in the kitchen holding the keys. Evan ran upstairs before the boxes were unloaded. Henry remained near the front door, studying Raymond. "You look sick," he said. "Long week." Henry glanced toward Laura and Evan. "Whatever you paid for this place, make sure it doesn't keep charging you." Raymond dismissed the comment, but the words followed him back to work. He began trying to replace the money. The business losses were worse than Laura understood. A tax refund was delayed. A private accounting job disappeared when the client sold his company. The deadline Raymond had invented moved further away. He could have sold the house while most of the money was recoverable. He could have told Laura before she unpacked every box. He could have approached Miguel and admitted that fear had overtaken judgment. Each option remained available. Each now cost more than it had the day before. Raymond chose a different solution. He altered another record to prevent the first shortage from becoming visible during routine review. When that was not enough, he used a second portion of the fund to protect the first decision. He no longer claimed the money was needed only for the down payment. Now he told himself he had to keep everything stable until he could repair it at once. The lie was growing, but so was the language he used to make it sound responsible. He was preserving stability. He was preventing panic. He was buying time. Months passed. A scheduled review was postponed when the outside accountant became ill. Miguel said they would reschedule after the holidays. Raymond felt his body loosen. The missing money had not returned, and no family had been made safer. Yet because discovery was delayed, Raymond experienced the postponement as if he had been granted permission. At the beginning, he had feared the money might be needed. Now he feared only that someone might look closely enough to see it was gone. He continued helping workers. Those good acts gave him material for a new defense inside his own mind. A thief would not work this hard for other people. A criminal would not feel this guilty. Raymond used his guilt as evidence that he was still trustworthy. But guilt did not return the money. It only taught him how to suffer while continuing. Then Kessler Steel announced proposed cuts to wages, health benefits, and overtime protections. Workers crowded into the union hall demanding a response. Miguel warned that a strike was possible. Across the room, Raymond heard the word strike and understood what it meant before anyone else did. The emergency fund was about to stop being a number on a report. Families would soon need it to remain in their homes. Raymond looked at the workers waiting for him to explain whether the union was ready. He knew the honest answer. He stood before them and gave a different one. "The fund is strong," he said. "We can protect our people." The room applauded. Raymond had begun by taking money because he believed losing a house would prove he had failed his family. Now he was willing to risk other families' homes to keep them from learning the truth. The strike vote passed on a Thursday night. By Friday morning, the gates at Kessler Steel were crowded with signs, thermoses, folding chairs, and workers trying to appear less afraid than they were. The first days carried a rough unity. People brought food. Children drew posters. Cars honked as they passed the line. Raymond stood beside Miguel and told everyone the union was prepared. He knew it was not. The emergency fund could survive a short stoppage if every payment was reduced and no major crisis occurred. But the missing money had removed the margin between hardship and collapse. Raymond had promised that families would be protected because admitting otherwise would expose the account. At first, he treated the shortage like another accounting problem. He delayed reimbursements, encouraged workers to seek public assistance, and asked local churches to expand food distribution without explaining why the union could not cover what it had promised. Those measures bought days, not safety. Applications began covering Raymond's desk: rent, medicine, electricity, car repairs, childcare. Each file belonged to someone he knew. Nora Keene submitted a request after the strike reduced her income to almost nothing. Her daughter had developed a respiratory condition, and the apartment's heating system needed repair. Years earlier, Raymond had stayed late to keep Nora from being evicted. Now he placed her application beneath several others. Nora had recently supported Miguel's demand for a full review of union finances. Raymond told himself that was not why she waited. He said her landlord had not supplied the right document. He said another family had a more urgent need. He said he would return to her file the following morning. 3 mornings passed. Meanwhile, Dale Mercer received assistance within hours. Dale had defended Raymond at the previous board meeting and called questions about the fund an insult to a man who had served the union for years. The difference was not written into policy. It existed only inside Raymond. Soon, workers recognized the pattern. Those who supported Raymond found his office door open. Those who asked questions were told the process had slowed because of the strike. Raymond never announced a punishment. He did not need to. Fear taught people what gratitude had failed to teach them. Laura noticed he was sleeping less and answering calls in the garage. She asked whether the fund was running low. Raymond said the problem was demand, not missing money. The statement contained enough truth to survive. Miguel spent his days on the picket line and his nights negotiating with the company. He trusted Raymond to manage the fund because that division of responsibility had worked for years. Then Dennis Hall brought him copies of 2 assistance requests. One had been approved immediately. The other, submitted earlier and involving a greater need, remained pending. Miguel asked Raymond for the complete disbursement list. Raymond said he was still reconciling it. 2 days later, he provided a summary rather than the underlying records. Miguel did not accuse him. That made Raymond more afraid. Late one evening, Miguel entered the union office carrying a box of old deposit slips and monthly statements. He closed the door. "I need you to explain something," he said. Raymond looked at the open box and understood that the shortage had become visible. Miguel pointed to balances that did not match the reports given to the board. He had also found a payment authorization linked to the period when Raymond bought the house. For several seconds, Raymond considered telling the truth. He imagined admitting that he had taken the money once, then panicked. He imagined Laura selling the house and walking into the union hall without a title. The images felt unbearable. So he began with a smaller lie. He said the discrepancy came from a temporary transfer that had not yet been recorded properly. Miguel listened. Then he asked, "Did you use union money for the house?" Raymond did not answer. Miguel sat across from him and laid out a path that would cost Raymond almost everything, but could still protect the families. Raymond had 7 days. He would disclose the missing funds, resign as treasurer, place the house for sale, and turn every account over to an independent auditor. Miguel would admit that oversight had failed under his leadership and accept responsibility for not insisting on stronger controls. The offer stunned Raymond. Miguel was willing to damage his own reputation to keep the union alive. For one moment, Raymond felt relief. Someone had seen the worst thing he had done and had not immediately abandoned him. "I'll do it," Raymond said. Miguel left believing him. Raymond stayed behind. He opened Nora's file and read the note about her daughter's breathing. Then he looked at photographs from the house. Evan beside the maple tree, new curtains in the kitchen, Henry on the front steps. 7 days was enough time to tell the truth. It was also enough time to build another lie. Raymond reviewed every document Miguel had touched. He found an old authorization signed during a chaotic period after a workplace injury. Miguel's signature appeared on the form, though the transaction was legitimate. Raymond saw how it could be used. He did not act in panic. He considered the consequences. Miguel could be suspended. His family would hear people call him a thief. Workers who trusted him would question every promise he had made. Raymond knew all of that. He also knew Miguel was the only person still offering him a way back. On the 3rd day, Laura asked why Raymond had contacted a real estate agent about the house. He told her union officers might have to disclose major assets during negotiations. The lie came easily enough to frighten him. On the 5th day, Miguel called and asked whether Raymond had prepared the disclosure. Almost, Raymond said. He felt guilty before the call ended. But guilt had become familiar. He no longer treated it as a warning. He treated it as the price of continuing. Before the 7 days expired, Raymond altered the trail around one major transaction and placed Miguel's name where suspicion would find it first. He did not need to invent an entire story. He only needed the records to appear uncertain long enough for the board to hesitate. At the emergency meeting, Raymond presented the shortage as evidence of possible misconduct involving more than one officer. Miguel stared at him from across the table. At first, he looked confused. Then he understood. Raymond could not meet his eyes. The board suspended Miguel while an internal review was conducted. Raymond remained in control of emergency disbursements because removing both senior officers during a strike was considered too dangerous. The decision meant to protect the union placed even more power in Raymond's hands. Outside the hall, Miguel caught him near the parking lot. "I gave you a way to survive this as a human being," he said. Raymond wanted to say he had done it for Laura, Evan, the house, or the workers who would panic if the truth came out. None of those answers were honest enough. He had done it because Miguel's mercy required him to surrender control. That night, Raymond approved Dale Mercer's second request. Nora's application remained on his desk. The fund was shrinking. The strike was hardening. And the one man who could have forced Raymond to tell the truth had been pushed aside by Raymond himself. He had begun the story as someone hiding a theft. He ended that week as someone willing to create an innocent man to stand in front of it. Miguel's suspension should have given Raymond room to breathe. Instead, it made the union office feel smaller. Every time the front door opened, Raymond expected an auditor, an investigator, or Miguel carrying the original records. None of them came during the first week. The absence did not feel like safety. It felt like time being counted down. At home, Laura found an appraisal document for the house in Raymond's briefcase. She waited until Evan left for work before placing it on the kitchen table. "Why are you having the house valued?" Raymond said the union might require officers to disclose major assets. Laura did not argue. She brought out the closing statements, the canceled checks, and the loan records Raymond had avoided showing her. "I know my business lost money," she said. "I know we did not have enough to close. Where did the difference come from?" Raymond looked toward the window. For years, he had told himself Laura would leave if she saw him as a failure. Now she was offering something harder to accept. "We can sell it," she said. "We can repay whoever helped us. We can rent again. I would rather lose this house than learn you kept it by hurting somebody." She was not demanding perfection. She was offering survival after the truth. Raymond still lied. He said the money came from several private loans and that the paperwork was incomplete. Laura asked for names. Raymond accused her of treating him like a criminal. The word ended the conversation because both of them heard how close it was to the truth. Henry arrived that afternoon after Laura called him. He walked through the house without removing his coat. Raymond expected anger. Henry showed only exhaustion. Laura left them in the kitchen. Raymond began explaining before his father asked a question. He spoke about the company, the strike, the pressure, and the years he had spent protecting other families. Henry listened until Raymond said he had only borrowed what he intended to return. "That is what I said about the food," Henry replied. Raymond told him the situations were different. "They are," Henry said. "I took something after I had already lost almost everything. You took from people before they knew they were about to need it." Raymond felt the old instinct to expose Henry's failures and make him smaller. But his father had already named them himself. Henry said he had once been offered a chance to sign a false statement after the old mill closed. The document would have exaggerated an injury and increased his settlement. He had considered it. Ruth had told him they needed the money. He refused. The decision had not saved their house or restored his pension. It had only preserved one boundary Raymond had assumed his father never possessed. "I failed you in a lot of ways," Henry said. "But I did not make those men pay me with money that belonged to families like ours." He asked Raymond to call Miguel. Raymond said it was too late. Henry answered, "Too late to escape, the price is not the same as too late to stop charging other people." The next morning, Tomas Alvarez came to the union office. Rumors had begun spreading that missing money was connected to newer members and workers whose relatives sent part of their pay outside Ohio. Tomas had heard his own name mentioned in the parking lot. He placed an old photograph on Raymond's desk. It showed Henry and several workers after a furnace accident years earlier. Tomas stood beside Henry with one arm around his shoulder. "I was there when your father could not walk out alone," Tomas said. "Tell me whether you believe I stole from these people." Raymond knew he had not. He also knew the rumors distracted members from the accounts under his control. "I don't know what happened yet," Raymond said. "It was another lie built from refusal rather than invention." Tomas asked him to say publicly that no evidence implicated the immigrant workers. Raymond promised to review the matter. Tomas left the photograph behind. Later that day, Claire Danner, an independent accountant hired by the union board, called Raymond. She said the inconsistencies might still be explained if he turned over the original records voluntarily. "If I have to obtain them through counsel," she said, "this stops being a bookkeeping review." Raymond asked for 48 hours. Claire gave him until noon the next day. That evening, a final opportunity arrived. Samuel Pike, from the Asheville Community Credit Union, presented a rescue loan that could keep emergency payments operating for 6 more weeks. The rate was low. Local churches and several businesses had agreed to guarantee part of it. The condition was immediate independent review of every union account. The loan could protect Nora, Dennis, Thomas, and dozens of others. It could keep the strike alive long enough for negotiations to continue. It would also expose Raymond. At the board meeting, Laura sat in the rear. Henry stood near the door. Miguel, still suspended, had sent a written statement supporting the loan. Raymond held a list of 64 households already identified as financially vulnerable. Beside each name was a need: rent, medication, utilities, food, transportation. He understood the choice completely. Accepting the loan would cost him the house, his position, and possibly his freedom. Rejecting it would make those families absorb the cost instead. Raymond told the board the credit union was attempting to take control of the union during a crisis. He warned that an outside review could give the company access to strategy and weaken the strike. The fear was believable because companies had used financial pressure against unions before. Raymond used a real history of exploitation to conceal his own. The vote was scheduled for the following evening. After the meeting, Laura approached him in the empty hall. "Come home and tell me everything," she said. "Not the version that saves the house. The truth." Raymond looked past her toward the workers waiting outside his office. For most of his life, he had feared becoming powerless. Now the only path back required him to surrender control willingly. He told Laura there was nothing more to say. That night, Raymond sat alone in the house on Hawthorne Street. He opened the union ledger, the appraisal, and the list of 64 families. He almost called Miguel. Then he heard Evan moving upstairs and looked at the walls he had taught himself to confuse with dignity. Raymond put down the phone. The last doors were still open. He chose not to walk through them. The union hall was full before the meeting began. Workers stood along the walls because every chair had been taken. Some carried overdue notices, as if the paper itself might remind the room what the vote was supposed to protect. Samuel Pike explained the rescue loan in plain language. 6 more weeks of emergency payments. No control over negotiations. Only one condition: an independent review of the accounts. When Samuel finished, the room should have understood that the proposal offered time. Raymond made it sound like surrender. He spoke about banks that had abandoned Asheville before. He reminded workers of pension funds reduced behind closed doors and companies that had used debt to weaken unions. Every example contained some truth. That was why the warning worked. Raymond did not invent a new fear. He attached an old one to the people asking to examine his books. Miguel was not permitted to speak as an officer while suspended, but he sat in the rear. Tomas Alvarez and several newer workers stood nearby. Whispers followed them through the room. Someone claimed money had been sent outside the country. No one could identify where the rumor began. Raymond knew it was false. He also knew that correcting it would redirect attention toward him. Tomas asked whether the records contained evidence against any immigrant worker. The room went quiet. Raymond could have ended the rumor with one sentence. Instead, he said the review was incomplete and no possibility should be dismissed before all records were examined. It sounded cautious. It was an accusation disguised as patience. Ana Alvarez looked at Raymond, as if waiting for him to remember the photograph on his desk, the one showing Tomas helping Henry after the furnace accident. Raymond looked away. The vote was conducted by secret ballot. While members marked their choices, Raymond recognized people whose applications he had accelerated and people he had made wait. Dale Mercer nodded to him before placing his ballot in the box. Nora Keene did not. The rescue loan failed by 6 votes. Applause came from one side of the hall. On the other, people remained seated. Raymond felt relief before fear. The audit would not begin under the credit union's deadline. The accounts would remain under his control a little longer. Then Samuel gathered his papers, and Raymond saw the list of 64 households on the table. Nothing had been solved. The cost had only been reassigned. Within 10 days, emergency payments were reduced again. Families were told to rely on churches, relatives, and public assistance. Nora moved her daughter into her sister's living room after the heating problem in her apartment worsened. Dennis Hall sold the truck he used for side work. 2 families left Asheville before the end of the month. The hardships did not arrive together, allowing Raymond to call them isolated cases. One eviction was a landlord's decision. One lost car was a bank's decision. One unpaid prescription was a healthcare problem. He separated each consequence from the missing fund so he would not have to see the shape they formed together. The rumors against Tomas spread faster. Customers stopped entering Ana's grocery. A window was broken one night, and she covered it with plywood before reopening the next morning. The deeper damage was quieter. Former customers crossing the street, children hearing their parents called thieves, and neighbors treating innocence as something the family had to prove. Miguel tried to speak at a public meeting, but people shouted that he was protecting Tomas. Raymond watched from the side. The lie was now living without his assistance. He wanted to believe that meant it no longer belonged to him. At Kessler Steel, management saw the division and ended serious negotiations. The company offered limited concessions and demanded that most workers return under reduced terms. The strike committee could no longer promise families they could survive another month. Members began crossing the line, not because belief had vanished, but because belief could not keep the electricity on. The strike collapsed in its 7th week. Kessler Steel announced soon afterward that the Asheville facility would close. Management blamed market conditions, operating costs, and labor instability. The company had its own history of harming the town, but Raymond had given it the opening. The union that should have answered as one body had been divided into the grateful, the accused, and the desperate. Claire Danner continued working after the loan failed. Records outside the union connected the earliest shortage to the period when Raymond purchased the Hawthorne Street house. A bank employee separately identified transactions that contradicted Raymond's public reports. The evidence no longer depended on Miguel's credibility. Laura confronted Raymond after investigators contacted her. She did not ask whether he had done it. She asked how many families had been denied help. Raymond said he did not know. Laura placed the list of 64 names on the kitchen table. "You knew enough to use them in a meeting," she said. She told him to surrender. Raymond packed a suitcase instead. He said he needed time to think and wanted to escape the attention surrounding the case. Evan found him folding shirts. "You said the men who took Grandpa's pension were cowards because they left before the workers could face them," his son said. "What are you doing now?" Raymond stopped packing. For a moment, the house became silent enough for him to hear every choice that had led there. He did not leave that night. It was not courage. Investigators were already watching the property. Federal agents arrested him the following morning. Henry stood across the street beside Miguel. He did not turn away, but he did not step forward. Raymond looked back at the front door, the maple tree, and the upstairs window Evan had once chosen. He had taken the first money because he believed the house proved he had escaped his father's humiliation. Now the house had become evidence. Behind him, Asheville was losing the mill, the union, and the belief that working families could survive by trusting one another. The arrest ended Raymond's control. It did not end what his choices had set in motion. The federal case against Raymond Cole began with a promise. The strike fund would still be there when workers needed it. Investigators reconstructed the missing money through bank records, union reports, loan documents, and the Hawthorne Street purchase. They found unauthorized payments, altered records, and a pattern that placed suspicion around Miguel Santos while keeping Raymond at the center of the accounts. The evidence did not describe one frightened decision. Raymond had taken money before the strike, concealed the shortage after workers began relying on the fund, and used delays and approvals to influence loyalty. When offered ways to limit the harm, he protected the house and transferred the cost to people who trusted him. Miguel was cleared before the trial began. Legal innocence did not restore what suspicion had taken. Some workers apologized, others avoided him. Miguel declined to run for office again, and Local 418 was dissolved before there was an organization left for him to lead. Tomas and Ana Alvarez carried consequences no acquittal could erase. The window at Ana's store was replaced, but many customers never returned. Their children remembered adults lowering their voices when the family entered a room. Nora Keene testified about the weeks after her assistance was delayed. She and her daughter survived by sleeping in a relative's living room and changing schools. "You do not lose one check," Nora said. "You lose the next decision, and then the next one." Laura testified without asking the judge to hate her husband. She described offering to sell the house and begin again. Raymond had not chosen the building over their marriage in one dramatic instant. He had chosen it each time he allowed her to live inside a story he knew was false. The house was sold under court order. After debts and legal costs, the restitution covered only a fraction of the losses. During sentencing, prosecutors submitted the names of 64 households harmed by the depleted fund. Some losses could be measured, others could not. A repossessed vehicle had a price. A child learning that neighbors believed her father was a thief did not. Miguel spoke last for the victims. He did not ask the court to pretend Raymond had never helped anyone. Denying the good years, he said, would make the crime easier to misunderstand. The reason we trusted him was because he had earned trust. That is what he chose to use. Judge Evelyn Marsh imposed sentence 2 days later. She acknowledged the closed mills, broken pension promises, and humiliation suffered by families like the Coles. Then she drew the line Raymond had refused to draw. "What happened to your father was an injustice," she said. "It did not create a private account from which you were entitled to collect from other workers." The judge rejected the argument that Raymond's actions began as an attempt to protect his family. Protection had not required hiding the truth from Laura after she offered to sell the house. It had not required delaying Nora's assistance, placing Miguel under suspicion, or allowing Tomas to become a target. Raymond had not faced one impossible choice. He had faced a sequence of difficult choices. At each stage, he selected the option that preserved his control while increasing someone else's risk. Judge Marsh noted that Raymond had received warnings, time, and alternatives. His conduct continued after he understood the shortage and after specific families had become dependent on the fund. She sentenced him to 32 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release and a restitution order he was unlikely ever to satisfy. The sentence reflected more than the amount taken. It addressed the duration of the fraud, the abuse of trust, the obstruction of review, and the deliberate harm done to innocent people to conceal the shortage. Raymond stood when the sentence was read. He looked toward Laura, Evan, and Miguel. He said he was sorry. No one interrupted him. But the courtroom did not reorganize itself around his regret. Kessler Steel remained closed. Families who had left Asheville did not return. Miguel did not recover the years in which his oldest friend allowed others to call him a thief. The apology mattered only as evidence that Raymond finally understood something. It did not function as payment. Years later, during a recorded prison interview, Raymond stopped calling the money a loan. He admitted that he had known workers would suffer if the fund failed. He still spoke about fear, the house, his father, the terror of being seen as powerless, but no longer claimed those things had removed his ability to choose. "I kept thinking I would fix it before the damage became real," he said. By then, the damage had been real for years. Henry died before Raymond became eligible for any meaningful reduction in custody. They exchanged a few letters but never reached the reconciliation Raymond once expected time to provide. In Henry's final letter, he wrote that losing his pension had taught him how quickly institutions could abandon people. Raymond, he said, had learned the wrong lesson. He had learned to become the institution. After Henry's death, his metal lunchbox was given to Evan. Inside were the final pension notice, an old photograph of the mill crew, and a copy of the court list containing 64 family names. There was no hidden money inside it, no document that could reverse the sentence, no explanation capable of restoring Ashvale. Only the record of 2 generations wounded by betrayal and the difference between suffering betrayal and choosing to pass it on. Raymond Cole was not born wanting to destroy a union. He was a frightened boy who watched his father lose work, security, and dignity. That past explains why money came to mean safety and why a house came to mean escape. But the families on the court list did not create that wound. Understanding where the darkness began does not mean forgiving what it became.